everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. The first week of March is always a conspicuous part of the year for me. No religious or secular holidays, no birthdays or wedding anniversaries in my social circle, but there is one series of dates that will always deserve some deep thought, if not any flowers, chocolate, or greeting cards. I'm talking about March 6th, 7th, and 8th, 2009, when Phish returned to the live stage at Hampton Coliseum. As of 2024, it will be 15 years since that beautiful weekend. Being a Phish stats nerd, round numbers, especially ones divisible by 5, hold significance for me. And looking back, it sometimes feels like the reunion happened to a completely different person. This is the topic for the 3-episode miniseries coming up starting today, called This Time Will Be Different, 15 Years Since Hampton. For the next 3 episodes, I will be joined by 2 co-hosts, Scott Marks and Charlie Dirksen of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation. The 3 of us will take a look back not only at the 2009 Hampton reunion, but at the major Phish events that led to it, including the band's hiatus from 2000 to 2002, the breakup from 2004 to 2008, and then episode 3 will focus on that glorious weekend in March 2009. But let's not skip too far ahead. Today, please welcome Scott Marks and Charlie Dirksen of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation as we open This Time Will Be Different, episode 1. Gentlemen, Charlie Dirksen, Scott Marks of Phish.net and the Mockingbird Foundation, thank you so much for joining me for this 3-episode arc, this kind of 3-episode mini-series within Attendance Bias called This Time Will Be Different, 15 Years Since Hampton. Charlie, how are you doing?
Well, thank you. Thanks again for inviting me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. And Scott, how are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be back.
I'm glad to have you back. You know, we have people from all over on my podcast, and I figure that this acknowledgement for the 15-year anniversary of Phish returning to Hampton is deserving of discussion. I'm crazy about round numbers, so 15 years means something to me, even if it really means nothing in the big scheme. I wanted this to be an acknowledgement and kind of an appreciation of how long it's been since Phish returned in 2009. Like, one thing I always think about when Phish plays now in 2023 or 2024 is it's all gravy at this point, right? There was a long stretch where a lot of us probably thought they would never come back, but now this is a lot of gravy. The hiatus and the breakup happened so long ago that to me it feels like they happened to another person, like another version of me in a different world. And I'd love to revisit what that was like, not only what life without Phish was like, but what our thoughts were at each time in 2000, and then again in 2004, and then maybe the last episode, 2009. Episode 1, today, we're hoping to focus on the hiatus. So Phish from 2000 to their comeback on December 31st, 2002. But let's take a look to get things started, the hiatus. So what led to it to begin with? Announced on September 30th, 2000 during Fly Famous Mockingbird. And Charlie, you said you were at that show, right?
I was, yeah. That was one of the 2 Vegas shows, right? Yeah, it was they were quite quite wild shows. They were both really good. Kid Rock came out, obviously, at one of them, causing a ruckus among some people who were, shocked that Phish would have a misogynist of his caliber on stage. But it's Vegas, and they were probably just, doing drugs together. And it was one of those things that, happens when one does drugs with another rock star. I think you get invited on stage. So it was hilarious what they did, obviously. The AC/DC cover. So, but yeah, I wish I remembered the Mockingbird narration more than I do. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I seem to recall at the time, like, because it had been rumored for a while that they were going to go on a hiatus. I don't recall being at all surprised that the October Shoreline shows were going to be the last Phish shows for a long time. But I I never doubted that they would be back, so I didn't look at them as the final Phish shows.
Scott, do you remember where you were about in the fall of 2000 when Phish made this announcement, and maybe even what your reaction to it was?
I was in my senior year of college and was like watching the webcast. It was like one of the first webcasts Fish had ever done on some internet thing, and I don't really remember what my reaction was, or maybe it's just kind of been dulled down over the years with the passage of time. And I've been dancing back for 14, maybe 15 years in March. It feels like a lifetime ago at this point.
Let me start by taking this opportunity. There's a couple of little things I just want to say that we've got about 6 gigs left on this tour, and the four of us were talking backstage, and I want to take this sort of speaking opportunity to thank a couple of people before we go on what's going to be kind of our first extended hiatus in about 17 years. Oh, you're pretty happy to see them yourself. No, really, it's kind of a cool thing right now. Actually, you might have seen some cameras floating around. They're doing an internet feed from this show, so it's an opportunity for us to use this feed into the internet to kind of speak to you and all the other people who have supported us so much over the last 17 years via cyberspace and all that. So let me just say that it's what we're planning on doing, so that you get the message clearly from us right here, is taking some time and writing some music and kind of getting our whole life back together, and then before we recharge, so we can hopefully get another 17 great years before we fly out. So, I will say this right now, just to all of you and all the people who have supported us and kind of given us this opportunity to have do what we do, and we do love it. Thank you all so much for everything that you've done for us, and we appreciate it so much. And I will do, like I said, we have 6 shows left. We're going up the West Coast, and then we're going to go back home. I will take this opportunity to draw attention to our crew. We have, without exaggerating, the greatest crew ever assembled in the history of music. And I mean that. And this is a chance for them to take a little breather too, as it's coming up. But I do want to, just from the 4 of us, thank them and just tell you, it's a lot goes into this. It's not just the 4 of us. It's a whole big family kind of team thing. So
I remember this being on a teeny tiny little computer screen, running on a probably 6K baud modem. Like, that's the best we could do.
Yeah, I had Ethernet through college. It's so different from, being able to watch it on your TV now. Technology was just a lot different back then.
Yeah, he said, I want to make sure that you get the message clearly from us right here. For all the crazy rumors that go around, I say Trey, but I really mean the band, Phish, is really taking a proactive stance to let everyone know what's going on. He said, we are taking some time and writing some music and kind of getting our home life back together, and before we can recharge, so we can hopefully go on another 17 great years. And then he goes on to thank the audience and the crew. And he says, this is a chance for them, the crew, to take a little breather too. And he says a lot goes into it. It's not just the 4 of us. It's a whole big family thing. And so I don't know. Was it as simple as drugs?
So
No.
The thing that I think about
so.
with the hiatus, I think it was Fishman that had it. had mentioned that they had a conversation, either at Big Cypress or right after Big Cypress when it ended. And they were like, where do we go from here? And he played at a festival of 80,000 people at the dawn of millennium. Where exactly would you go from there? And I guess you could, they continued on that trajectory. They could have been playing it in stadiums or something. They never got to that point. But, you've gone from, playing clubs to, playing at the Garden every year. That was like the high point. So I'm wondering if the seeds were kind of planted as far back as Big Cypress. You wouldn't know it because, Farmhouse came out in 2000 and they're doing all these promotional gigs, which you haven't seen any promotional gigs for any other album in the band's history. But Farmhouse, again, it just seemed like they were the highlight or the high point of their popularity, where, again, they're doing the radio gigs. And perhaps they could still do them now if they wanted to. Maybe it's just not something that they really care about. They're playing international shows in 97, 98, 99, 2000 in Europe and Japan. And they were just at that peak. And then the hiatus hits.
Charlie, what do you think? When I said, is it just drugs? It sounded like you had a lot to say too.
No, not a lot. But I mean, it wasn't just drugs. I think they were really tired. I think they've been playing a lot of shows. I think their family wanted to see them. Trey's girls were really young at that point, right? So, and Fishman, I don't think he was married yet. But yeah, like
Sophie had been pregnant at that point as well.
Right in '99.
Right. Yeah. So I think they needed a break. They played a lot of shows. But I mean, drugs contributed, but also, if I remember correctly, they had this crazy guest list. The Clinic, like, they had a lot of people who got after show passes and that sort of thing, or passes to get beers, at set break and stuff. And I think I remember hearing or reading that it was like crazy big at that point. And one way of sort of trying to shut that scene down, or at least cull it down a bit, was just to go on a hiatus. So I think that may have been part of it. But I think I would hope the main reason was this: so they needed to spend more time with their families and take it easy. But it didn't last that long,
right?
It really didn't. So,
the thing about their family stood out to me too. The fact that Trey mentions that the band, and this is a quote, he said they want to get their home lives back in order. Yeah, I think they were entering their 40s in 2000. And you have to imagine, from being 17, 18, all the way through those decades of their lives, I have to imagine the whole band was eating, drinking, thinking, and playing Phish since 1983 or 85, if you're Page. And between recording and tours, they were not home that often. And when they were on tour, they were probably partying like the rock stars that they were.
But to be clear, like, they were not entering their 40s. They were, as someone who's been through the 40s, in their defense, in 2000, Trey was 35?
Yeah, I guess maybe toward the
mid 30s.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah. So I just, how big it is to go to the 40s when you're 36, 37, 38. You're not in your 40s yet. God damn it.
It's hard to say. Like, you look at the hiatus, and then you look at all the shows Trey played the next year. Like, he's really, never taken a break. Maybe after the arrest, he took a little bit of a break because he had to. But I mean, he's been playing, whether it's with Phish or Tab, pretty much nonstop since '83. Page didn't play a ton of shows during the hiatus. Mike didn't play a ton of shows during the hiatus. Fishman obviously did as well. So, I
think Phish.
You take one band, you switch for something else, and you're.
I think Phish is on record. I think Fishman is on record, Scott, as saying that Trey shits music. I think that's like a direct quote.
Yes,
quote. Right. So, for someone who shits music, there's just it
can't stop.
I bet you, even when what was it, 10 months when he was in the drug program after he got arrested? I want to say it was 10 months, but he probably was still composing, I mean,
yeah.
So Is that a break? I mean, it's a break from touring and playing in front of people, but
well, it's a break.
But also,
it's a break from Phish, because I think even after they got back together, I know we're skipping around the timeline here, but I think Page said, and this is not a direct quote, I'm paraphrasing, that one thing he regrets is that they didn't avoid the same problem the Grateful Dead had, is that they hired all their friends and they hired all their families, so that if they wanted to take a break, that means that they weren't paying their friends. And so they became this sort of the business, but they were also I don't know about enablers, but they had friends that were relying on them for income and benefits and stuff. So the pressure to tour became unavoidable. And to the point where Trey was writing a lot, composing a lot in 2000, 2001, 2002. Almost all of Farmhouse was written by him, and he produced it. And I had a feeling that he was trying to maybe separate himself from Phish a little bit. I mean, I went to see the show in September 14th at Darien Lake. And when you're seeing a show and the encore is the Unla Josie Wales, you're not really seeing a Phish show anymore. It's Trey acoustic solo. And so I think that, he wants to take a little breather, he says. But to Scott's point earlier, he went on tour with Tab in 2000 and 2001, released a solo album in 2002. Gordon released Clone with Leo Kottke in 2002. Page recorded and toured with Vida Blue. So they were on break from each other, but not really a break from touring and making music. I only saw one show for Phish in 2000. And I want to just bring it back a little bit, if we could reminisce what the Phish scene was like at the time. Charlie, you said you didn't see that much Phish at the time, right?
No, I can't remember what shows I saw in 2000 other than the two Vegases and the two Shorelines within the last week or two of 1.0, so to speak. I may have seen one over the summer. I just can't remember right now, and I don't have my stats in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I'm old, so that's my memory isn't what it once was. But I mean, as far as the scene then, I think it's actually still very similar to what it is today, in that all your typical kinds of fans hanging out in the lot from pre-show, all that was there 23 years ago. Now it's maybe at certain venues it's a larger scene than it was 23 years ago, but you still got a lot of the same types of folks in the lot pre-show. And in general, like a lot of organizations that were around 23 years ago among fans are still in existence today.
Like the Fellowship.
Funky Bitches. Yeah. I mean, Mockingbird, obviously. And, there's certainly a lot more community groups now than there were then, which is nice. I don't think it was different in kind. I think it was maybe smaller depending on the venue. But like the scene at Great Woods 20, some odd years ago was strikingly similar to the scene at Great Woods when I was there last year, or whatever the hell it was they last played. I don't think the scene has really changed that much, frankly.
It's interesting. I had a different perspective because I thought in 2000, when you'd walk around the lot, like 2004 was like Survivor, Wook Island. Things were dangerous, like Danger Found You. I thought sometimes in 2000 or 99 in 2000, I thought things were like a little less ebullient. I think that maybe even the music also was kind of beatless and a little bit more ambient, so that it wasn't as upbeat and danceable. But in the lot, I remember more people whispering like Molly, Farmies, and fewer doses, goo balls. I don't know. It just seemed like things got a little harder in the lot. Like there was danger to be found, but you had to look for it. But by 2003 or 2004, really, it was hard to avoid. Scott, you saw way more shows than either of us. What do you think?
And I think it's always been there.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people selling nitrous going back to the 90s. I don't think it was quite as prevalent as it is now. Memory is a funny thing when you remember certain things more than others. You kind of gloss over other things. I feel like you had maybe more shows selling out in 99, 2000 than you do now. I just feel like they're still very popular, but I just feel like they got that peak of popularity. I remember before I had the Phish companions, the Farmers Almanacs, where they would have the capacity of the show, and then like the ticket amounts. Whether it was accurate information or I don't know, but it looked like a lot of those shows were selling out in the late '90s. Now, like you look at the MSG run coming up. I think New Year's Eve may or may not be sold out. The other 3 nights are not sold out, and also the economy is a little different, and ticket prices are more expensive. So, and there are a lot of different things that go into it. Something that strikes me as being kind of big was going back to technology. People didn't have smartphones. You weren't taking a photo and posting online. So there was no online really to post. Social media didn't exist in the late '90s, early 2000s. And you had the message boards. I had been passing information on to Brian Lee from fans.com. So that's a name that goes back there, that website. So Gadiel's board and Fancy Tour had just started up. And I was passing along set list to Brian to put on the fans.com at that point. You had to rely on whoever was going to pass the information along. You had to wait weeks for tapes to show up. You didn't have technology at your fingertips. So in that regard, the scene was kind of a little more, it wasn't as dialed in, if you will. It was kind of more focused on the music and less on anything else, which is not, always how it is now. So it's definitely different in that regard, more pure, if you will, because you just didn't have technology really invading into things.
I had similar thoughts. In some of my notes, I wrote that cell phones existed, but they were not common. We didn't know the name and background of every song instantaneously because smartphones were still 7 years away. Like if you didn't have a great tape connection, you had to maybe ask your neighbor what the new song was being played. Like, for example, it took me a while to know that Albuquerque was a Neil Young song. I didn't know that Phish didn't write that, and GPS didn't exist. So sometimes it was more of an adventure getting to or from the show. Go ahead.
Deer Creek in '98, when they were doing all the covers that summer, I had no idea what Rhinoceros was. I think I had in my set list is She Knows. And it says, no, there's no way to look it up. So someone's going to either tell you you got it right, tell you got it wrong. But it was a lot harder to have the correct information. And again, now you can look it up and be accurate pretty quick. Or if you don't know it, you're at a show and Fish from the Road could happen. Or if you're following my account and I'm tweeting from a show and see from his archive, but you just didn't have that. Again, it's definitely different.
Charlie, who were you as a person and as a fan right before the hiatus?
I was an attorney. I think I passed the California bar exam in December of 1999, so less than a year before the hiatus. So I was working as a attorney at the firm I'm still at now. I think I started there in April 2000. As a fan at that time, like I said earlier, I wasn't seeing Phish that much, primarily because I was working all the time in a new firm as a young lawyer. So didn't have a lot of time really to go see shows, but I remember prioritizing going to Vegas and the Shoreline shows because they were so close, to San Francisco where I was living then.
I was a freshman in college and I was pretty upset when Phish announced they were going on hiatus, because in my mind, after reading, 2 versions of the Farmer's Almanac, Dean Budnick's Phish Compendium, going on the Fishbowl on AOL and just absorbing everything, everyone was saying how college was the time that you could just jump in a car with a bunch of friends and go off on an adventure and see Phish. It didn't matter where they were playing, just go on your fun adventure. And right when I got to college in the fall of 2000, they're like, all right, we're going. We we don't know when we'll be back. They literally called it an indefinite hiatus. I put that in quotes. It's an indefinite hiatus.
Yeah, but I mean, and something you said just reminded me. I passed the bar in December 98, not 99. But I was still a young lawyer. Like I was under 2 years practicing law in October 2000. But to what you just said, they called it an indefinite hiatus, but I remember thinking at the time that they would definitely be back, and that I did, for whatever reason, I didn't expect it to be that long, and it wasn't. I think I mentioned to you, Brian, at one point I got interviewed by MTV over the phone. And I can't remember how they figured out that I was a fisherman, but I think it was probably just through the Mockingbird Foundation. I'm actually quoted online as basically, somewhat welcoming the hiatus, saying that, they should spend more time with their family members anyway, but that I expected they'll be back. So I really do remember at the time thinking the hiatus may be indefinite, but Phish will be back soon. And they were. Like, it really wasn't that long of a hiatus. So
to me, it felt like forever. However, I was in school in Buffalo, and when I wasn't in college, I was home on Long Island, which is very close to New York City. And to me, the jam scene, I put the word jam in quotes because it came to mean anything that involved improvisation. But the jam scene seemed to be kind of exploding. I mean, I started just writing a bunch of bands. It seemed like any night of the week, Monday through Sunday, for $30 or less, usually less, you could find a venue or a band somewhere in New York City to go see. And the first ones that came to mind for me were Soul Live, Galactic, Government Mule, Mo, Robert Randolph and the Family Band. The other ones, which was the Grateful Dead iteration at the time, the Disco Biscuits, and of course, Tab, Trey Anastasio Band. I don't know if it was Phish's influence was coming home to roost, or as they became kind of more popular and mainstream, like Scott was saying about like VH1 or being on, certain promotions for Farmhouse. Maybe the rising success of Peter Shapiro and Madison House Productions were getting a little more influential in the concert promotion arena. But the term jam band was thrown around very loosely at this time. Like, they were bands that fit basically any genre you liked, but if they improvised, they kind of found their way into this jam band orbit.
I mean, you had bands that had grown up following Phish or the Dead. And, at that point, you just had a lot more that showed up in the late 90s, String Cheese, Humphreys. So that was like the first huge wave. And there have been bands in the 80s, but just not really that same jam band level that really has not died down going into, 2023, 20 plus years later. Now I don't like using the torch being passed with everybody. You have a new generation of jam bands, if you will, that popped up in the last couple of years. You have the super old generation, if you will, with the Grateful Dead, and then the Allman Brothers aren't around anymore, and so then you have like Phish and Panic, or two of the bigger things that come to mind from the mid '80s. And then by the early-ish mid-90s, you start having more jam bands that are coming around at that point. People that had grown up in the 70s, if you will, 70s, 80s, that had Grateful Dead and Phish as their two primaries at that point, that started to play their own music and have been around for decades since.
Charlie, were you seeing live music during the hiatus?
Oh yeah, I saw a lot of Steve Kimmock living in San Francisco, so I saw basically anytime Kimmock played in any iteration, I saw it. Some Phil and Friends shows. I can't remember if the other ones were still even playing in 2001, but I know I saw a bunch of Phil and Friends. When was Oysterhead? Did Oysterhead start?
Oysterhead played their show in around Jazz Fest in 2000. And then they did their real tour in fall of 2001.
Right, and I saw that. I saw something on that, and Humphreys McGee. I think I saw my first Humphreys McGee show around then. Widespread, as you mentioned, Scott. I think I saw them. Sound Tribe, Sector 9. I may have seen them around then. I wasn't really a Disco Biscuits fan, but I'm pretty sure I saw them around then. But yeah, it's like basically, I went to the Fillmore a lot in San Francisco in 2001, 2002, and obviously other years too since I lived in San Francisco. But I'd have to go back and try to look at stubs to see all the things that I saw. But I was at the Fillmore almost every month, probably back then, if not every month.
That's how I feel. I felt like Phish left this vacuum for these 18 months or so, or 20 months, however long it was. And looking back, I was kind of balanced between finding new music, but also trying to find something to fill that cup, fill that Phish cup that could not be filled. But when Tab is playing Jones Beach, this enormous venue that Phish plays regularly and recently, and it's sold out, you could tell that people were just trying to do that. Like they were like in the same position. They were trying to plug that hole somewhere. Whereas bands we've mentioned, Perpetual Groove, for me, a lot of it was Robert Randolph. And Galactic seemed to play on the East Coast every other day, it seemed. It just seemed like these bands that could play anywhere from 600 to 1,500 person venues, it was an embarrassment of riches. They were everywhere. It was kind of, for lack of a better word, a golden age of jam band music, whereas the most popular one, aside from the other ones or the Allman Brothers, the most popular one was nowhere to be found. And then in June of 2002, the first Bonnaroo was held in Tennessee. And it seemed like with the absence of Phish, there was this central gathering place for, I put this in quotes, for the scene. And I don't know, it just seemed like this kind of magnet Bonnaroo was, that any band that was mentioned in the same breath as that word was there, with, by the way, Trey headlining one night and Widespread Panic the other. They say that a rising tide lifts all boats, and I think Bonnaroo did that for a lot of smaller festivals as well. Do you guys remember the rise of those festivals, like the All Good Festival, Modown, and a lot of bands started having their own little curated festivals?
So I was at the original Bonnaroo, which was 3 nights.
Okay.
As opposed to 4 now. I think that was the real driving force for festivals. You had, in terms of jam band stuff, in the 90s, you had Lollapalooza and Horde. So, those were around, not so much jam band. Horde had more stuff, as opposed to Lollapalooza. You had Woodstock, for better or for worse, in 94 and 99. But Bonnaroo was definitely there, and you had other stuff like All Good that came out after that. So you still have new festivals there showing up every year, but that was the big one. I want to say that Bonnaroo had kind of gotten their feet on the ground from the Phish festivals, how successful those had been, going back to Clipper Ball and up through Big Cypress.
And it's funny because now it's come full circle, where when Phish wants to have their festival, I can't speak for the upcoming Dover, Delaware festival, but say something like when they play at Atlantic City last summer, all the infrastructure and the setup of what a festival looks like is already there because they set the precedent all the way back in the mid-90s. And Bonnaroo, like you said, Scott, kind of took that template and made it for a wider audience. And now we have a whole summer festival circuit that we see that are focused almost exclusively on this jam band scene that we have. Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode. And Charlie, you brought this up in your interview with MTV. There was this question that I called everlasting of when will Phish get back together? You seemed entirely confident, right?
Yeah. I mean, the power of positive thought, right? I mean, I don't recall having a legitimate basis for that view. Like, I don't recall having any inside information at all whatsoever. I think when they announced it to be an indefinite hiatus, they were sincere, and that was true. But I just, at the time, I remember very clearly that I felt that they would be back. Like I had zero doubt that they would be back. But I had zero doubt that Phish would be back after Coventry. I like really thought there was just no way in hell they were going to end like that. I mean, I just really had no doubt in my mind. It's just a matter of time if they all survived, that Phish would be back. I just never.
Perhaps
you
it was because I was older, or just and more aware of what was going on. I definitely had a different feeling after Coventry. You know, I wasn't sure about anything at that point. Just how, I mean, it was a dark time in this history. Vegas being the real black eye, if you will, of 2004. Trey's voice and Kuroda not being there, and it's just kind of like the wheels went off the cart at that point. And being up to Coventry, and this is something where you had in writing, you know, the band was breaking up, you know, not just a hiatus, it was break up, and you know, both words, you know, the band's not playing, but breakup seems a lot more final as opposed to, hey, we just need to take a break for a while, as opposed to, we can't do this with each other.
Yeah, and we'll dig a little bit more into that, the differences of the hiatus versus the breakup in the next episode. But looking back to the transition...
Foreshadowing, kids, foreshadowing.
Yeah, right, as the English teacher, right? There's some, just to give you a tease of what's coming. I never considered that Phish wouldn't come back. I agree. It's just the uncertainty in 2002 was driving me crazy. Like going to these shows at the Irving Plaza or the Lions Den or any number of venues, the Paramount Theater in New York City. It was like methadone instead of the real stuff that I needed with Phish on hiatus. But I don't know where I was. But they did make the announcement. It was on August 14th, 2002, that they were going to make the comeback, and it's going to be on New Year's Eve, 2002 at Madison Square Garden. What I do remember is that this was the first time there would be an online lottery, which I did not get tickets. This was my first, we regret to inform you, email. But I do remember my friend Craig going to the show and calling me during set break. I was at a New Year's Eve party just screaming that Tom Hanks came out and some other nonsense that I couldn't quite make out because of the quality of cell phones at the time. And it was Phish at set break at Madison Square Garden during New Year's Eve. Do you guys remember where you were or what you thought when you heard that they were coming back at the New Year's Eve 2002 show?
I have no recollection whatsoever.
I mean, I was working in August of 2002, so I also don't remember.
Also working. I mean, I remember, you know, when they came back for Hampton, you know, seeing that video with like the colored Hampton being sketched in. That's pretty clear in my mind. But for 2002, no idea.
And what was your reaction to Round Room? Either of you guys, because they first released Walls of the Cave as, I don't know if this is correct, but as like a single, basically. I remember it being released on, talk about flashbacks, AOL First Listen. America Online had exclusive rights to put out, to stream Walls of the Cave. I was not too happy with it. I loved the cowbell and the piano intro, but once the song proper began, I thought, oh, this is Phish. I wasn't too happy. And anyone who listens to my podcast knows that I'm not a huge fan of Walls of the Cave in general, but that's for another episode. What were you guys thinking? Wait, Charlie, did you go to that New Year's Eve show?
Yes. It was a blast. I was thrilled to be able to go. And I went with a bunch of friends. It was just could not have been more excited. Frankly, the vibe in the room was akin to it was on March 6th, 2009. I mean, it was incredible vibe. You know, the show unfortunately was a mixed bag musically, to say the least. But fun was had by most, you know, for sure. You know, I didn't go to the Hampton shows that followed it though.
Right. The reverse New Year's run. Scott, what were your impressions of Round Room or of their first show back, if you remember?
I liked Round Room. The things that stand out to me in late 2002 were them appearing on Saturday Night Live.
I don't remember
promoting stuff. They had it was the Al Gore episode. Al Gore hosted, and Phish played the song and also appeared in the Peanuts sketch.
Jared's Room.
And they also just did like the Saturday TV Funhouse, like a little animated thing, and so it was like Charlie Brown, Peanuts, and then Phish plays a little bit. You Enjoy Myself, like the actual studio version gets played. But so I mean, that sticks out. I did not go to New Year's. I didn't go to the Hampton shows. I had just started my job in fall of 2002, and didn't know as many people in the scene as wasn't as I do now. Didn't really have that network. At that point, just kind of. I had seen 55 shows during from college from 97 to 2000, so still saw a lot, but it's a lot different now for me than it was then. And I ended up only seeing one show from that winter tour, and so really a different thing for me at that point of my life. Difference there was that now you had live Phish and you could go back and listen to the shows a lot faster for downloads. Didn't have apps or anything, but you could at least have soundboards of the shows.
Right, and we'll get into that in our next episode when we get into a quick overview of 2.0 and then what we started to talk about today, the breakup, how it was similar, how it was different from the hiatus. But for those of you who were not around in the scene in the early 2000s, just so you know, life does go on when Phish is off the table. So I just want to thank you guys both for joining me to get this started. This time will be different. 15 years since Hampton. So it's these conversations, interestingly, or these events were over 20 years ago now, like 23 or 24 years ago. So we're really digging back. So next time, the next episode, we'll dig a little bit closer to the present when we talk about what Phish was like during 2.0 and what life was like without Phish in the jam scene immediately after. So Scott, thank you again so much. And Charlie, thank you again so much for being a part of this.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for having us.
And that's it for today's first episode of This Time Will Be Different, 15 years since Hampton. I would first, of course, like to thank again Scott Marks and Charlie Dirksen of the Mockingbird Foundation. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please visit the Mockingbird Foundation and donate anything you can. There's no fact check today for attendance bias since this was more of a discussion-based conversation and no real musical analysis. But I'm already looking forward to next week. I hope you could join us for This Time Will Be Different, episode 2, where we get into the return from the hiatus, 2.0, and then, of course, Phish's breakup. But thank you again for listening and taking this ride with us, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias, or This Time Will Be Different, 15 years since Hampton.